Chaim, everyone. So the Muslim scholar Abu Ali al-Hassan ibn al-Haytham, who's known in the West as al-Hassan, was a brilliant mathematician and scientist who became legendary and well-known throughout Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. Now, at that time, just over 1,000 years ago, Al-Hakim bi Amr Allah, the Fatimid Caliph of Egypt, was having a big problem. There were frequent floods caused by the Nile River overflowing, and he really wanted to build a dam across the Nile River, which would allow him to control the flow of the water. And he needed a brilliant mathematician and engineer who would be able to build such a dam across such a river. So he reached out to our friend Al-Hassan, and he asked him if he can do such a thing, if he can build such a dam. And Al-Hassan felt very honored by this. Al-Hassan felt very honored by this request, and of course he agreed. One little problem is that he had never seen the Nile. He had never been to Egypt before, and he had never seen the Nile River. But that wasn't a big problem because, of course, Al-Hakim immediately invited him to come down to Egypt, and he made a big ceremony to greet him. And on his first day in Egypt, he took him out to the Nile River, and he showed him exactly where he wants the dam to be. And Al-Hassan took one look at the river, and he realized he made a big mistake. He's not going to be able to pull off a dam over here. The river was too big, and the flow was too powerful. Right? So what do?
I'll make myself later.
So really, he should have turned to the king, and he should have said, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but I can't build a dam over here." But the issue was that this specific king had a reputation of executing people who brought him bad news.
Oh, no.
And Al-Hassan knew that if he would tell the king he's not able to build the dam, things wouldn't work out very well for him. So what other options did he have? If he tries to build the dam and then the dam fails, the king's going to be even more angry at him. Right? So
it's going to take 25 years.
That's one option. You can tell him what happens at the end of 25 years. Who knows what's going to happen then? Right? And maybe the king might not be happy.
Or something happens to the king, or something happens to the guy building.
That's possible, but I think the king would recognize that 25 years is a little extreme for a dam. So he pulled a page out of David HaMelech's playbook from 2,000 years earlier, and he faked insanity. He faked insanity. And the king was not happy that his big mathematician and engineer suddenly goes insane. But even such a king like himself is not going to execute an insane person. He was still angry, and he confiscated all of Al-Hassan's possessions, and he had him locked up under house arrest for the next 10 years until the king died.
Exactly, 10 years he's going to die.
And they didn't know at the time he was going to die in 10 years. He was assassinated in 10 years. But so he was locked up in house arrest for 10 years. And for long periods of time he was kept in darkness. Now it was not complete darkness, because the room that he was in had a keyhole where a little ray of light was able to shine through. And Al-Hassan spent a lot of time on this ray of light. The only thing he was able to look at, right? He's stuck in a room of darkness. He spent a lot of time on this ray of light shining in through the keyhole. And he noticed something very interesting. He noticed that the ray went from the keyhole all the way across the room. And on the opposite wall, it formed a picture of what was going on outside. It was an upside down picture, but it was a picture of what was going on outside. This is known as a camera obscura, which was obviously later the foundation for the pinhole camera. And Al-Hassan is trying to figure out what?
You have a lens in the keyhole?
No, there was no lens. It was just small. As long as it's small enough, it's not going to be very focused because there's no lens. But as long as the hole is small enough, you could see a outline. You can see an image of what's outside, a projection. Yeah. Now, the smaller, you're right. The smaller, you really need a very small hole in order for it to be focused, or you need a lens. And he didn't have that. But even without a lens, you can still see what's going on. And Al-Hassan was trying to figure out what's going on over here. What's causing this? Why is there an image? Why is it upside down? And he had a lot of time to think. Okay. And he had a lot of time to think. And he began to theorize that if light travels in a straight line through the hole straight to the opposite wall, it would actually make sense that actually form an inverted image. And he began testing it. They would give him some time to go outside every day. So he started to place different objects and candles of different areas. He wanted to see how the light would show up inside his room. And then he began doing experiments. He began blocking part of the light. He began first testing out different shadows. Then he began using different pieces of glass. He used prisms. Eventually he started using lenses. And he began to study different phenomena related to light. And during those 10 years, while he was in prison, he wrote a book. In this book, he wrote how light works. He wrote how rainbows are formed. He wrote about eclipse. He wrote about lenses, about prisms.
He landed up in jail, not me.
And he eventually published a book known as Kitab al-Manazar, the Book of Optics, which is still considered one of the foundations of our understanding of optics today. So you can have a person who's locked up in complete darkness, right? And he can choose to focus on the darkness. Or you could say, I'm locked up in darkness, but let me focus on the light. And that's really what we're going to focus our class on today, right? The fact that sometimes we may be locked up in darkness, but we can begin writing the book of light. Chaim. So, when you're talking to a young child, and you want to give him instructions, you have to give him very detailed instructions. You have to tell him exactly how everything is done. When you're talking to an older person, a wise person, you can give them general things and they'll figure things out by themselves. Now, the Torah gives us many instructions about how the Jewish people would serve Hashem in the Mishkan and different materials that they would use in the Mishkan. But the Torah almost never tells us how those materials are made. The Torah tells the Jewish people to use flour in certain sacrifices, but it never tells us how to make flour. It tells us we use wine, but we're never taught to take grapes and squeeze them to make wine. However, in this week's Parsha, when the Torah speaks about the oil for the menorah, the Torah right away stops and starts telling us a little bit about how the oil was made. The Torah says you should take oil, it should be pure oil, it should be made from olives that are crushed for illumination. So why does the Torah need to tell us how the oil is made? The Jewish people, I'm sure, knew how to make oil. Furthermore, if we look at the details of lighting the menorah, the Torah seems to go out of its way to give extra detailed instructions. Right? We the Torah tells us the position of everything inside the Mishkan. When it comes to lighting the menorah, we all know that there was the Holy of Holies where the Aron HaKodesh was. And in front of the Holy of Holies, water is good. In front of the Aron HaKodesh, in front of the Holy of Holies, there was a Parshas, a curtain. And outside were all the other vessels, the table, the menorah, the Mizbeach. But over here, when the Torah tells you us to light the menorah, it says that Aaron should light the menorah in the Ohel Moed, in the tent of glory, the tent of appointment, and it should be done michutz laparoiches asher aleibus. It should be outside of the curtain, which is over the Aron, the testimony of Hashem. Now, why does it need to tell us it was outside of the curtain? Everything was outside of the curtain. I mean, no one was allowed to go behind the curtain, except for the Kohen Gadol once a year. So why are we told these details? So, in order to understand this, let's bring down 3 stories. So, our first story, in 1929, in Yerushalayim, an elderly chassid, Berfol Wolf of Scully, Galicia, passed away. And he left behind a manuscript. This is brought down in tales of Hasidim on Yom Tovim. He left behind a manuscript with his memoirs, and he writes, he records that in the year 1881 he visited the city of Shpoli in Russia, and there he saw the gravesite of Rabbi Leib, the Shpala Zayda, and next to the gravesite of the Shpala Zayda he saw a very interesting grave. It said, "Here is buried Yosele Haganev HaKadosh." Yosele, the holy thief. And he asked the people of the city, who is this Yosele, the holy thief? Right, that's an interesting title. Right, I've heard of the holy tzaddik, the holy scholar. Who's the holy thief? So they told him like this. They told him that the Shpoler Zayda was known for his tremendous love towards every Jew. From the greatest of the great to the lowest of the low. Even the thieves in town used to know they can always come to the Shpoler Zayda for a blessing. He wouldn't give them a blessing in their business, but he would give them a blessing in other matters of life. And he would help them out if they needed help in different affairs. And he would refer to them as my thieves, my ganovim, he would say. And one of them was a young man, Yosef, a Jewish boy who was an orphan, and he didn't receive the best education, and at some age he dropped everything and he started hanging out with his non-Jewish friends, and eventually he joined a group of very not the best group of people. He joined the band. Eventually he joined the band of thieves, and he was very skinny and a very good climber, and they really appreciated his skills over there. He was able to get through any hole. He was able to squeeze through any hole, right? He was known as someone who was b'chachma b'seach sha'arim, right? That was his.
Windows and he opens gates.
And every night they would be busy. They would rob a different store, and they were pretty good. They were pretty talented, and they were never caught. One day, the leader of the band of thieves decides, instead of every night having to pull off a different robbery and with a few kopecks and maybe a couple of ruble every night, let's do a big heist. Let's, we'll pull off something big. Be able to retire, maybe take a good long vacation.
Church can.
So we can break into the local church where they have lots of gold and silver, and we can retire off this wealth. Now, how do you get into the local church? There's big iron gates, they're all locked. But all the way on top of the tower, the church tower, there's a little window, right? And there's no bars in the window. It's open. They don't think anyone's going to get up there. But we got Yosele, a good climber. Right? So they get Yosele, they prepare long ropes and bags. Yosele's going to climb up. He's going to load bags in the ropes. They're going to pull it out through the window. They have everything planned out, and Yosele is in there. He's been loading up the bags. They start pulling some of the bags out, and suddenly one of the thieves notices that the night watchman is heading their way. Right? He's doing one of his trips through the town, and he notifies his friends, and they quickly all disappear. Yosele is inside, and he's waiting for the next bag to be pulled up, and nothing's happening. So he finishes packing everything up, and he climbs up to the window himself. And in the meantime, the night watchman had walked by, and he noticed this rope with a bag hanging down from the window. And he had called some of his friends to join in, some fellow watchmen, and the whole police department was there waiting outside. And Yosele sticks his head out of the window, and he's like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And he sees his friends aren't there, and he's in big trouble. And he was arrested, and he was, of course, they were upset. A Jew has the audacity to break into our church. He was taken to court, and Yosele came up with a story. What was the story he tells the judge? He says, "Listen, I never wanted to steal anything from the church. I'm a very poor man, and I pray to my, I pray every day to get the money, but it doesn't work. So I figured I'll try to go to the church, pray there. So I went to the church and I started to pray, and then it didn't work. And so I was embarrassed to go during the day because I'm a Jew. But I decided to come at night. I used to come in every night, and I would pray there at night. And I came there for the last few nights. I was praying every night, and my prayers don't work. But every night I come in there and I'm praying, and I see this full of gold over there, and my prayers aren't working. And I'm saying to the gods over there, you have so much gold here. Can't you give me a little bit? They refuse. So I figured I'll take it myself. So that's why. The judge was not happy with this story, and he was sentenced to death by burning. The priest, the head priest of the church, approached Yossele and he says, "Listen, you did a terrible thing, and you're going to get a terrible punishment. But the church is very merciful, and we want to give you another chance. We want to give you a special opportunity. If you agree to abandon your religion and to join our church, then first of all, of course, we're going to spare you the terrible punishment. And not only that, we're going to support you. We're going to give you everything you need. You're never going to have to be a thief again." And Yossele gets all angry. "How dare you speak to me like that? I'm a Jew." And he says, you're a Jew. You don't really act like a Jew. You're busy stealing from churches. And he's like, "Look, I was born a Jew and I'm going to die a Jew." Okay, so they schedule the public execution the next day. They bring out Yossele in the middle of the marketplace. They have a barrel of burning tar, burning pitch. And they brought him out, and they stand him there in front with his hands tied. And again, the priest, the whole town is gathered around. And again, they tell him, "We're giving you a last chance. You could save your life. You won't have to suffer. We'll even support you." And Yossele gets up in front of everybody, and he's like, "Never! I was born a Jew. Until my last moment, I'll remain a Jew." They take him, and they pick him up, and they lower his legs into the burning hot pitch, and he begins to scream. They pull him out, and again, the priest comes over to him, and he says, we could call a doctor to cure all the wounds that you have, and stop all of your suffering. All you need to do. And he could barely talk. He could barely talk in pain. But again, his last breath, he yells out, "I was born a Jew, and I'll remain a Jew till my last moment." And of course, the Shebal Zayda would later ask to be buried next to him, and he would tell everyone, "See, these are really my Ganovim." So you can have a person who lives his whole life, right, in very far away, but then when he gets into trouble, when he's in a difficult situation, when you might think he's in the darkest of the darkest places, and at that point, the Jewish neshama comes out. The light that's inside of him will come out. And you'll see the real light that's inside the neshama of every Jew.
It's finished.
That's our first story. Our second story involves Rabbi Avram Lumpel. He's a textile merchant in Poland before the war. And he runs a successful textile business. And he was known as a very honest person. And this was shortly before the war, when there was a lot of corruption going on in Poland. And it was very difficult to be an honest businessman in those days. Right? Everybody was doing things under the books, under the table, off the books. What? And Ravram worked very hard to keep everything on the up and up. But no one's perfect. And one day, one of his acquaintances offers him this amazing business deal with tremendous opportunity to make a tremendous amount of money. But they're going to have to cut a little bit of the red tape, and they're going to have to avoid some of the normal processes that they go through. And Rabbi Avram was a little blinded by the money involved, and he joined this business deal. Now, he quickly realized that this was a lot worse than he thought, and there was a whole tax evasion scam going on over here, and he wanted to remove himself from this, but by that time it was already too late, and the Polish government had already raided the offices involved, and his name showed up on the list. Jew, his name made his way quickly to the top of the list. He must be the one organizing the whole thing, and a trial date was set. Now, Avram traveled to his Rebbe, Rabbi Sachar Doiv of Belz, who he would travel to all the time whenever he needed a bracha for his business. And he wanted to tell the Rebbe to pour out his heart and tell him what's going on. But when he came in front of the Rebbe, he was too embarrassed. He's going to tell the Rebbe that he got involved in some illegal activities. So he says to the Rebbe, I'm having some trouble in my business. Can you give me a bracha? So the Rebbe said to him like this. The Rebbe said, when a Jew's in trouble and they need help from Hashem, and they don't know where their salvation is going to come from, the best thing for them to do, for a person in such a situation to do, is to look around for somebody else who needs help, and to help somebody else. So I want you, during your travels, over the next few months, to look around and keep an eye open if somebody needs help. Anybody. Doesn't need to be someone in your community. Doesn't even need to be a fellow Jew. It might be someone you meet in the marketplace who needs help. And I want you to be on the lookout and help anybody that you see. And that's what so Avraham realized this is going to be the source of his salvation, the source of his bracha, and that's what he did. He spent the next few months for the trial, everywhere he went, looking around for anybody who needs help. During one of his trips, as he's in the train station, he notices a woman walking back and forth on the platform. So he approaches her. She's not a Jewish woman. He approaches her and he asks her, "Do you need help? Is everything okay?" And she says, "Yeah, I'm fine." And he looks at her. He realizes everything is not fine. And he says, "Really? Is there something I can do? Is there something wrong?" And she says, "Yeah, my purse is gone. I don't know if I lost it. Somebody might have stolen it. I don't have my documents. I don't have my ticket, and I don't have any money. And I'm stuck here, far away from my home." So Avraham said, "How much would it cost for you to get home?" And she says, 25 zloty. So he pulls out 30 zloty. He gives it to her in case she needs extra money on the way. And she's so thankful. She says, "Thank you so much. How can I repay you? What's your name?" And he says, "It's fine. If you see somebody else who needs help, help him." And he leaves. And this is how he continues on through the next few months, trying to help everybody he could. A few months later, the date of the trial approached, and Avraham is in court. And the door opens, and the 3 judges walk in, and Avraham's mouth drops open. One of the judges is this woman who he had helped a few months earlier. Right? The prosecutor gets up, and he starts describing this terrible crime that's taking place, and how this whole group of scammers led by this Jew, Rabbi Avraham, is trying to defraud the government. And two judges are sitting there nodding their heads. Yeah, of course, sure, this Jew is. And after he finishes, the 3rd judge, this woman gets up, and she says, "I want to tell everybody a different side of the story." She says, "A few months ago, I was in a train station, and I lost my purse, and I didn't know what to do. I was wandering around. I was too embarrassed to ask anybody for help. And this Jew, Rabbi Avraham, stops me. And he says, 'Is everything okay?' And I didn't want to bother him. I said, 'Everything's fine.' But he didn't let up. He saw I was in trouble. And he said, 'Really? Is there any way I can help you?' And as soon as you heard my problem, he immediately took out the money. I asked him if I could repay him. I wanted to know his name. He didn't want to tell me his name." He says, "Do you think someone like this would lead such a scam?" I'm not sure if he was involved. If he wasn't involved, I'm sure it was a mistake. And it certainly wasn't, he didn't intend to become involved in such a scheme. And after she finished, all 3 judges voted to dismiss the case. So this is our second story, where a person might be in a dark place. And the way to get out of the dark place is by recognizing that I can be a light to others. I can help others. I can be a light to others. And moving on to our 3rd story. After about 2 weeks of traveling, Baruch and his son Chaim arrived in Vilna. Now, Baruch had heard so much about the great hospital in Vilna, and his son Chaim had been very ill, and the doctors in his little village had not been able to do anything to help him. And therefore he had traveled as fast as he could to get to the big Jewish hospital in Vilna. He comes to the check-in, and he tells them exactly what's wrong with his son and what treatment he needs. And they tell him, okay, sure, we'll take care of your son. And the price is, they print out, it's a big bill. And he says, what do you mean, this is a Jewish hospital? And they say, yeah, it's a Jewish hospital. We still got to, we still have books to, still have a budget to balance. And he says, I don't have any money. And he says, what do poor Jewish people do? And he said, well, if there's a fund that covers poor people, you have to get a special document from the Jewish community of Vilna. They'll check it, they'll look into your finances, and they'll, And he says, I'm not from Vilna. I didn't bring my financial documents with me, and I need my son to be treated as soon as possible. What can I do? So they said to him, if that's the case, we advise you to go to Rab Chaim Oizer, the rabbi of Vilna. Tell him what's going on, and if he gives you a letter and he tells us to treat you, we'll treat you without charging. Okay, he forgets the address to Rab Chaim Oizer's house. He rushes out, asks for directions. He runs to Rab Chaim Oizer's house, and as he comes there, he can't believe his eyes. There's a huge crowd, a huge line waiting outside. Right? He tries to push his way. He's desperate. His son is sick. He tries to push his way through. He comes to the front door. I need to get into the rabbi right away. And they're like, sorry, you're not going to see anything. And he doesn't even wait to hear their explanation. Why? There's a long line. He runs out. He starts running around the block. And he runs through the alleyway. And he notices the courtyard behind the house, the gates. He jumps over the gates into the courtyard. And he looks at the house and he notices an open window. So Baruch jumps in through the open window, landing right in Reb Chaim Oizer's study. Chaim Oizer looks up, someone just jumped into his window. Now, usually when someone knocks at his door, he knows usually they need help, but somebody jumping into the window really needs help. So he says, how can I help you? And he says, well, he starts crying, my son is sick and I don't have any money, and I want him to be admitted to the Jewish hospital. And they told me I need a letter from you. So Chaim Oizer jumps up, immediately he rushes to get a paper and quill, and he writes him a nice letter. And then he turns to him, he says, you're going to be in Vilna probably for a few weeks, do you have a place to stay? And he says, no, I don't know where to stay. I'm worried about my son, I'm worried about a place to stay later. And he says, here, let me write you another letter to the leader of the community, the leader of the Hektish, he'll he'll give you a place to stay, they'll arrange food for you. Baruch is so thankful. He turns back to jump out the window. And Chaim Oizer says, you don't need to go out the window, you can go out the front door. Right, so this time he comes out the front door and everybody's looking at him. How did you get in? And he says, I just got a letter from Chaim Oizer. Okay. And all of their mouths drop open. And they look surprised. And he says, what are you surprised about? And he says, don't you know why we're here? He says, no. And he says, Reb Chaim Oizer's daughter Malka just passed away from polio and he's preparing for the funeral. Wow. That's why we're over here. So at a time when we might be in a real place of darkness, right? When we're, we can't bring our all the happiness in our life seems to be gone. We have to realize that might be a time to try to bring happiness to others, to try to help somebody else. And this is really what's going on in this week's Parsha with the Menayim. The Torah tells us like this. It says, if you find yourself outside of the curtain, what does that mean? You find yourself pushed outside. You feel like you're an outsider. You find yourself kassis. You find yourself all crushed up like an olive that's been crushed in an olive press. And you might think, what am I supposed to do in such a situation? So the Torah tells us, this is the time for you to become a light. This is the time for you to be oil and illuminate the Beis Hamikdash and eventually the entire world. When you're locked up in a room of darkness, that might be the time to write the book on light. When you're in a very low spiritual situation, like Yosela, and everything seems dark, and you're thrown into prison, you're caught robbing a church, that might be a time when you can elevate yourself, when you can turn yourself into a light and become a kaddish, become a holy person. When you're in a difficult legal situation, then you have to realize that that's a time when you have to look around and see, who can I help out? right? How can I be a light for others? Right? And none of us are on the level of Reb Chaim Oizer, obviously, in such a situation that he was in. But we all have smaller losses in our life. And we have to realize that when we experience a small loss, we can also turn around and help somebody else. And to conclude with one final story. On the 14th day of Tevis, in Tafshin Nun Ches, in the year 1998, the Tasher Rebbe got a phone call from a local rabbi in Montreal who told him about a couple in Montreal who was having a very difficult Shalom Bayis situation. You see, they were having their parnasa. They were blessed with blessed with children, but they weren't blessed with parnasa. And Shabbos and Yom Tov were very difficult, and it caused a lot of stress in the house, especially around Shabbos time when they barely had any food for Shabbos. And it caused a lot of friction between the husband and the wife. And the husband felt like he was failing his family. Right? Unfortunately, people in that situation sometimes feel that way. And the children also were struggling in school to keep up with their studies. And their father had no time to really help them. He was busy working all day. And the stress started to pile up until one day the husband had enough. He couldn't take it anymore, and he left his house. And he calls the rabbi and he says, "That's it. I can't do it anymore. I'm going to write a divorce for my wife, and I'm out." The rabbi, who just realized how serious the situation was, says, "Come to me. Let's talk about it. I'm sure we can help out with some of the problems you have." And he says, "No, absolutely not. It's I made up my mind. I don't want to have anything to do with my family anymore. I want to write a get and I want to leave. I already left. I want to write a get. And that's it." So this rabbi called the Tasher Rebbe, who knew this person, and he said, "Maybe you can reach out to him, fix up this marriage." So the Tasher Rebbe calls this husband, this father, who agrees to come speak with him. And yes, he agrees to come speak with him. And the Rebbe tells him, "We didn't realize what you were going through. And obviously it's not something you should have to burden, you should have to bear on your own. The whole community is responsible for helping out. And he says, I want you to know that I arranged for every Friday, every Shabbos is going to send food and money to your house. There's also a cleaning service that's going to come clean your house before Shabbos and Yom Tov. In addition, we arranged tutoring for your children to help them out with the situation in school. And there's also, we're working on arranging for therapy for you and your wife, obviously after everything you went through. It's going to be to put everything back together." And, the husband is very thankful. He says, "Thank you for everything you've done, all the efforts you put in. But, it's good for my family, but for me, it's too late. I already made up my mind. I'm not going back." So the Rebbe says, "Don't you realize you have a family, a wife, children? How can you throw that all away?" And he says, I'll think about it. Give me a few days. I'll get back to you in 2 days. Okay. 2 days later, Thursday, the Rebbe calls him. And he says to the Rebbe, "Listen, I thought it over and, I don't want to do it. I can't do it. I suffered enough. I'm not going back home." And the Rebbe again starts talking to him. He starts telling him, "You realize what it means? A home, a family, you're throwing it all away. What you think it's going to be better when you leave?" And again, the Rebbe is trying to convince him. And he says, "You know what? I'll think, give me another day. I'll think about it." Fine. The next morning, Friday morning, the 18th of Tevis, Tafshin on Ches, in January 1998. Early Friday morning, Rabbi Mordechai, the Tasher Rebbe's oldest son, died of a sudden heart attack. The Rebbe was davening at that time. I think they waited till the Rebbe finished davening to notify him. And they told the Rebbe, of course, losing his oldest son, can imagine what this means. And they told the Rebbe, it's Friday, and it's in January. And January in Montreal is a lot different than January in Florida. And Shabbos is going to be coming in soon, and we have to immediately begin the funeral. And the Rebbe says, sure, of course, start getting everything ready, but I have something I need to take care of first. The Rebbe goes into his office, and he takes out the phone. And he calls up his husband. The husband picks up the phone, and he says, Rebbe, listen, you're going to try to convince me. I thought it over. I can't do it. I'm not doing it. I'm not going home. The Rebbe says, listen, I need you to go home to meet your family for Shabbos. No, Rebbe, I can't do it. The Rebbe says, listen, I am right now on the way to a funeral. A 50-year-old man just died, leaving behind a family with children. And I'm going to the funeral, but I don't want to come to the funeral empty-handed. I want to come with a schus to the funeral. If you promise me that you will go home for this and spend Shabbos with your family, then I know that this person's neshama will go straight up to Gan Eden. Wow, Rebbe, that's a big responsibility. Who is this man? Rebbe says, my oldest son. Now, even this husband wasn't able to refuse. He says, sure, of course, Rebbe, for your son, I'll be home for Shabbos. Rebbe says, well, he says, I'm not going to the funeral until you go home, and I want you to call me from your home number and tell me that you're home for Shabbos. And the Rebbe stayed in his office, and he waited till this man went home and called him from his home number, and that's when he went out to the funeral. Right? So, we're talking about tzaddikim who are, we can't touch their ankles, right? None of us can ever imagine being in such a situation. But, as we mentioned earlier, we all have smaller losses. It could be financial losses. It could be health issues. It could be legal issues. It could be fights in the house. We have to realize that the time when we feel crushed, when we're stuck, when we're locked up in a dark room, that's the time for us to become lights. That's the time for us to write the book of light. That's the time for us to be a light for ourselves, for our family, and for all the people around us. L'chaim, l'chaim.